Hi, students. This is Professor Wood, aka Miss Wood to you. Just wanted to go over what we are doing today. Today, you will be annotating a poem with me, Dracula's Army. So, we are going to be covering the standard figurative language and analyze how figurative language creates mood in the text, and that is our 3.1. Also, we will be looking at structures and features in the text, paraphrasing and summarizing, and universal theme going along with it, as well as literary elements. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started on our annotations. So I'm going to go ahead and first things I always do when I'm annotating a poem, as you all very well know, is the first thing I do is number the lines. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32. So we have 32 lines. Of course, I'll be moving the screen up and down as I go. But first things first, I'm going to read the poem to you, and then we will begin to annotate, and I will create a key as I go along, so that you are ready and prepared. And as you know, of course, we have already read or listened to the short story, Dracula's Guest. And so, continuing on with that Gothic theme, we're going to do this poem, Army of Draculas by Patrick Sylvain. So, I'm going to just go ahead and read the poem to you. All monsters live here on this half-dead island. An army of Draculas haunting street demonstration with diabolical tanks roaring down Jean-Jacques Deslane's boulevard to eat children who dare sing. I see darkness all around and hear a hawk's laughter ringing in the plains. I smell urination in the dust, for death is the rhythm of the ground. It is not yet midnight, and the skies empty of the moon. I hear wolves wail and hours creaking past dead bones on this half-dead island. The rifle of the Zenglendos stares death in the eyes and coughs blood. I still hear the hawk's laughter and crunching bones. Inside election booths, soldiers carry death in their mouths, rifles play ballads, and gun butts slap faces until blood river flows. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you actually begin to highlight the Dracula images and the metaphors and explain how they compare to the supernatural imagery with Bram Stoker's Dracula's Guest. I'm going to have you highlight words and phrases that create fear and violence or oppression, and answer the question, what mood do these choices establish? I'm also going to have you mark examples of figurative language, that's personification, and metaphors and similes and such. And then I'm going to also have you annotate places where the setting feels like it controls people in the same way that Stoker's storm and graveyard in Dracula's Guest control events. So the first thing I'm going to do is, of course, divide the stanzas up, because in this one that you have, the stanzas are not divided. So I'm going to do that first, and then I will begin to annotate with you, so that you are able to put exactly what I have down. So the first things first is I'm going to divide here, where all children who dare sing. I'm just going to draw a line, and you know my line is, of course, crooked. And I'm going to put first stanza, and then I'm going to go to I see a darkness all around and hear a hawk's laughter ringing in the plains, smelling urination in the dust. For death is the rhythm of the ground. That is the next stanza. So 10 through 15. Second stanza. Your third stanza goes, it is not yet midnight to Past Dead Bones, so 16 through 20. And then I would go through the Hawk's Laughter and Crunching Bones, so 21 through 26 for stanza 4, and then of course stanza 5. So you have 5 stanza poems. There is really no generalized structure as far as like quatrains go when it comes to this particular poem. It is also in free verse. It doesn't have a rhyme scheme, and so that's very, very important. Very, very important. So one of the first things I would say is, of course, I asked you to highlight the Dracula images / metaphor. So I'm going to use my blue highlighter for that. And so I'm actually going to highlight the word Dracula here. And then I'm going to highlight as well, I'm going to highlight tanks here because, again, images and metaphors explaining how they can compare to the supernatural imagery in Stoker. So in the first stanza, I'm also going to highlight the word monsters because that's important. And then half dead, because half dead, of course, while it is a very vivid wording, it also describes people that are half dead, which is often associated with vampirism. So that's really important as well. So looking at that first stanza, all the monsters live here on this half-dead island. An army of Draculas haunting street demonstration with diabolical tanks roaring down Jean-Jacques Delane Boulevard to eat children who dare sing. So I'm going to just go ahead and highlight eat children because that is also very, very visual. So one of the first things that I'm going to say is when you're annotating, of course, you want to make commentary, and you also want to paraphrase things and explain how they compare, to what you're looking for. So I'm asking you to compare and contrast adaptations of the Dracula story going back to our 3.3 that we did last week. And in this case, we have monsters and Half Dead Island, Dracula army, street demonstrations, diabolical tanks. I mean, if you haven't quite figured out here this particular stanza, I'm just going to write it here. Army of Draculas compares political violence to supernatural horror. Natural horror. So it's connected that way. And I'm also going to note the tanks eating children, which of course is personification, really emphasizes. Remember, when I am annotating, I use academic language, emphasizes brutality. So, so that's what I've got. The tanks eating children emphasizes brutality. So the army of Draculas and diabolical tanks are comparing political violence to supernatural horror. The tanks eating children emphasize brutality. So basically, I have just paraphrased that entire stanza. Now, obviously, the tanks eating children is personification because tanks can't actually eat children. It's also a hyperbole. So you could use, of course, a different color to annotate that for the figurative language. Also, it says underline words and phrases that create fear. And so we will pick a color to underline a phrase that creates fear. I don't know if it creates fear in you, but it certainly creates fear in me. But for now, we're just going to focus on some of the imagery is what we're going to start with. And so in the second stanza, we have, I see darkness all around and Hear a hawk's laughter ringing in the plains. I smell urination in the dust, for death is the rhythm of the ground. So I'm going to use pink here, and I'm going to use pink for my figurative language. And of course, figurative language is personification, metaphor, simile, all of those different ones, but those are the ones that you're most familiar. So I'm just going to highlight here a hawk's laughter because that is personification. And then I'm also going to highlight here, death is the rhythm of the ground. That is most definitely a metaphor. So I'm just going to highlight that. And then I'm also going to underline that as well. But as far as paraphrasing and commentary go, I'm going to say, the hawk's laughter here personifies cruelty and death is the rhythm illustrates violence embedded in the land. So all throughout there, just like with Dracula, there's violence. And remember, the traveler wanted to go down that road, and Johann was like, "No, you don't need to go down that road. It's really bad. It's a horrible place." Essentially, with this as well, you have the image of a hawk. Hawks are typically associated with luck. Sometimes they are associated with death, like different types of birds with that. But death is the rhythm is a very vivid phrase as well. And in my opinion here, this particular phrase really evokes some, and so I'm using green. Death is the rhythm. It shows the violence. It really evokes fear. And remember, language shapes tone in a lot of ways. And so in this way, this word choice establishes a mood of violence and really a very difficult situation, possibly a civil war, possibly just corruption and violence all around. And again, you have that situation sort of with Dracula's death with the manipulation. And sometimes that occurs when you are dealing with political violence, especially. I'm also going to go back up here to this one, to eat children in the first stanza, because to me that also definitely creates fear and violence as well. Eating children is not exactly something that we would recommend doing. So there's that. Now, going from there into the third stanza, it is not yet midnight, and yet I hear wolves wail and hours creaking past dead bones. So here I'm going to underline dead bones, because to me, not only is it vivid imagery, but it evokes that sense of fear there. And it also kind of echoes that Gothic supernatural danger. So we have the imagery of midnight. So I'm going to highlight that here in my blue because it's my imagery. And then wolves, of course, the wolves wailing, that is also alliteration. So I'm going to pick another color for alliteration. And then just right above it, alliteration as well. And the alliteration is important. But again, the wolves and the dead bones are echoing that Gothic and supernatural danger. Midnight, of course, we talked about the time of day or night. where things are very scary and bad things can happen. So in my paraphrase area here in my margin notes, I'm going to write the images of wolves and dead bones, okay, echo Gothic / supernatural danger. Remember that the wolf was a major part of Dracula's guest. So going back to our previous text as well. The imagery of midnight is supposed to build suspense. Just like the storm with Stoker. So all of those things, hours creaking past dead bones. Again, if you go back to the Dracula's guest story, remember that he, to get out of the storm, went into the tomb and encountered the undead woman. So that's really, really important. So again, you can connect these two actually quite well. Going into the fourth stanza, we've got on this half-dead island, the rifle of the Zenglendos stares death in the eyes and coughs blood. I still hear the hawk's laughter and crunching bones. Okay, so again, we have the imagery here. We have the grotesque imagery of the grotesque, which is one of the aspects of Gothic horror or the Gothic genre. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight, of course, the rifle, very important. And then I'm going to use the green pen as I did earlier, coughs blood, because that does evoke fear and imagery. It not just evokes fear and imagery and fear within an individual, but it also, not, you can picture it, makes me think of tuberculosis, to be honest with you, but that's because of my studies on Poe. But you know, the rifle stares death in the eyes and coughs blood. It's personifying, of course, the rifle as well. And then, of course, the hawk's laughter. So I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that because that is personification. The rifle stares death in the eyes. The rifle coughs blood. So that is also personification. That actually really illustrates the idea. This stanza illustrates, so I'm going to write that down. This stanza illustrates that violence is both living and grotesque. So the idea of violence, you know, and it says that the island is half dead. And I think that's really interesting. I would say that's more hyperbole. So I can go ahead and highlight that pink. And then I will identify each of these devices at the top in the key so that you are aware. I'm just using pink in general for figurative language. Okay, so in the fifth stanza, we're going to just read it. Inside election booths, soldiers carry death in their mouths. Rifles play ballads and gun butts slap faces until blood river flows. So again, going back to underlining things that evoke fear or violence or oppression. So I'm going to slap faces here. That's violence. And then blood river flows. Now, obviously, that is also imagery. So I'm going to highlight that as well. I'm going to use my pink here for rifles playing ballads. That's personification. Soldiers carry death in their mouths. That is imagery, or actually more of a hyperbole. So Soldiers don't actually carry deaths in their mouths. But one of the most important things I want you to see here is um, election booths, because that does illustrate political violence. Um, does it create fear, violence, or oppression? Not currently, but I think that this is really important as far as like setting goes. So I'm going to highlight that in purple, light purple, not dark purple, and then and talk about that. We have the election booths. We have also the in the first stanza, the half dead island, as well. And then, of course, you've got the streets, again, and I think that's also really important. Street demonstrations. So again, that's all setting up at the top. So I use purple for that as well. But going back to the paraphrase at the end here, the particular here that I'm really kind of wanting you, what are election booths meant for? So election booths, let me move this up so you can see it. Election booths are tools meant for democracy. But here they become spaces of death. The rifles play ballads, figuratively, which is translating to a corrupt society or culture, however you want to look at it. So, in that sense, so essentially what I've done here is I have actually highlighted and annotated everything in the poem and paraphrased every stanza for you, even though the stanzas are not divided. Now, that being said, it's really, really important. How can we connect this to Dracula? How do we connect this to Dracula's guest? So, what is this poem about? Well, I mean, if you haven't figured it out, it is about um, violence in Haiti, and we need to connect that um, with Dracula's guest. So again, compare and contrast. It's another one of your stanzas. And also, how is the supernatural myth or text of Dracula adapted together? Again, that's going back to last week's stanza. Um, Going back to last week's standard, not stanza. So both of the texts draw on the Dracula myth to create fear and unease, you know. So while Stoker's story employs graveyards and the standard supernatural presence to build suspense, this poem has things like tanks and rifles and soldiers as modern Draculas. So metaphorically, essentially, it took the Dracula myth, Patrick Sylvain did, he took the Dracula myth and turned the oppressive regimes into supernatural sort of monsters. So essentially, in both stories, what you have here is the Dracula figure is not just a person, it's a force of terror that both haunts and consumes. So I'm going to write that down here on your paper somewhere, but it is important. You know, in as far as Dracula's guests, nature and the supernatural dominate the human characters. You know, you have the snowstorm, Travelers are at the mercy of the weather, man versus nature. And then you have, of course, the wolves, of course, and then unseen influences, which is the vampiress that our narrator runs into. However, in this particular poem that I just had you annotate, political oppression is dominating the citizens. Tanks and rifles are silencing children's songs, as if the state itself were vampiric. Remember, we talked about energy vampires. That's essentially the same thing. So either way, if I were writing a compare on these two, I would definitely say that both works really illustrate that individuals are powerless against overwhelming, almost supernatural forces and control. And they both utilize fear as a tool, fear of the unknown, definitely is important in Dracula's Guest, and fear of violence and dictatorship, how it shapes life in Haiti, is really the center of this particular poem. So in both of these works, fear is not random, it's systemic. It keeps people compliant, it keeps them silent, it keeps them paralyzed. So I didn't really talk about this much with Dracula's Guest, but I really do want to discuss this. Setting can actually be considered a character in some works of literature. So Stoker's setting, like the storms, the graveyards, the villages, it controls the events in the short story that you listened to / read, the same way that a character might. And in this case, the half-dead island, aka Haiti, and the streets are acting as living forces that trap your citizens, which echoes the idea that environment reinforces oppression. So again, different time periods, of course. Stoker wrote the Gothic horror for a Victorian audience that tapped into their fascination with the supernatural. And then Sylvain, your author here, he adapted Gothic horror tropes, Gothic horror motifs, Gothic horror ideas to critique real world political actions and creating social commentary about violence and corruption in different countries. So if I were to make this connection, basically what your author David or Patrick Sylvain is doing here is he is reimagining Dracula's Gothic terror in a modern sense, which illustrates that monsters are not just supernatural. They can be governments, they can be armies, they can be systems of oppression. So with that being said, the poem is annotated. I'm going to take pictures. I'm going to put it on your Google Classroom so that you do have it. You have an assignment that goes with it. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again on Monday as we launch into our next work of literature, which is Edgar Allan Poe. Have a great week.